Excellent. Okay, so is that taken over my screen share?
Yes.
You should be able to see the starting slide. Excellent. Yes. So, yeah. Once again, my apologies for my lateness onto the call here. Without further ado, we'll get into it. Thank you very much for the introduction to Tulu and for the opportunity to talk today. It's great to be able to add that to my list now. Speaking with you guys, so that's very nice. So my first slide here is basically that same information again. Buried in the middle of it is consultant and CSI manager. So just for context here, I've been a consultant in the IT service management area for about 15 years in a consulting role, with years doing things like support previous to that. And as a part of that career, I've been a CSI manager in one of my roles for a period of time. What I do at the moment is I primarily lead projects with various clients that AFJ Solutions have, implementing IT service management processes, implementing CMDBs, various integrations, value adds and improvements in these areas, and helping people to improve their maturity in these areas, which includes some IT asset management topics as well as a part of that. Okay, so one thing I had wanted to do sorry, was to get you a couple of the polls. So I do apologize for this, as I wasn't able to get them due to the network outage. Is it possible for you to set them up while I go on to the next slide and start talking about the agenda?
Do you want to email it or
yeah, I can email that through to you now. Okay. So I'll then just move straight on to the next slide. So we just hit reply on there and send that. Okay. So moving on to our agenda. So we're going to start with some topics around approach. What kind of approach do you want to take when you're undertaking an improvement program? What are the principles that go behind it? And what are some good ideas and things to think about as a part of that? Then the next section that we're going to move on to is about roadmaps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show an example roadmap. I'm going to put through a little bit, and I'm going to show how roadmaps can be used as a way of planning, but also as a tool for communication and for helping to generate your vision. It's also a tool for controlling and setting expectations. Then the next section we're going to move on to is making it stick. So when we're making changes, how do we make the changes that we've made have a lasting effect? I've certainly seen many instances where people have had a lot of energy at the beginning to say, right, we need to have a process in this area. So we're going to go off and design a process, and we're going to get some tools, and we do the process and the technology side. And then we find that the organization doesn't work with it as well as we would like them to. So some pointers around how we do that more from the psychological side of thing, which involves bringing the people. How do we make sure that the people are on our journey? So those last two do kind of go a little bit hand in hand. So Tulu, this was the point where I was going to ideally go into the first poll. So I don't know if you've managed to get one ready.
We are checking right now. If you can give us a little more time, we will check and let you know. Absolutely no problem. I will move on to the next slide. So this is going into our approach here. So here we're using a term CSI. So for those on the call who know ITIL, then CSI is one of the concepts, and in ITIL 2 and 3, it was a key concept, its own book in ITIL 3, continuous service improvement. So I've just got a couple of quotations here, which, as you may guess from the pictures, are not from the IT industry. So we've got two here. We've got Jan Carlson from SAS. So SAS is the Scandinavian Airline Service.
So it's a regional airline based in Scandinavia and Europe. And in the early 80s, it was pretty much at the bottom of the pile. At least that's how the history goes. And Jan Carlson came in as CEO and said, we need to change things. We need to make this airline better. And he gave a presentation to launch this improvement program across their organization. And in it, it includes this line: you cannot improve anything by 1,000%, but you can improve 1,000 things by 1%. And if you look at them as an airline, at the very high level, they were operating. They had planes, they were flying them around, people were getting on the planes, people were buying tickets. They were able to, to charge for that and bring the money in. They were able to pay suppliers, all of the really big ticket items, which, a company needs to be able to operate. But there was lots of things within that in which they could improve to optimize what it was that they were doing. So he came up with some things. And in his presentation, it's got a whole variety of changes, some that he pulls out. I've pulled out a couple here. Better newspapers in business class. So when you're in business class, you get on the plane, you get a free newspaper. If you don't want to read it, it doesn't really help you. It doesn't give you any benefit. And this was one of their target markets. So they wanted to encourage business flyers to want to fly with them. So that's a small thing that they can do to make a bit of a difference. And it gives them one of their 1% improvements. Another thing that they had was they had lots of flights which were going through Kastrup, which was their hub airport. So lots of people are flying into Kastrup in Copenhagen, and they're having to walk halfway across an airport in order to catch their connecting flight. So any problems with the inbound flight, and you can miss your outbound flight and you can get stuck in the hub airport, and you have to rebook, and then you've got to find space for the person on another flight. You might need to put them up overnight at cost in the local hotels, all of these kind of things. And of course, you're damaging your image with these people. So they looked at figures to see who was getting off of what flights and getting onto what flights. And they put the connecting flights close to each other. So you'd come out of gate 17 and you'd go into gate 18. So all you had to do was walk straight across the way. You've got a 10-meter walk between flights. So now you can literally do that at the last moment, and you don't have to stress about missing your flight. And of course, that comes with all the improvements that it comes with. So there was obviously more in this whole stream of work than just these two ideas, but it gives you the idea of the flavor of this idea that we're going to keep making progress, and we're going to keep doing it. He ends the presentation with a nice call to action. We are all in this together. This is changes that are being made at all layers of the organization. And from 1981 to 1983, they went from having ranked 14 out of 17 airlines in Europe for punctuality. So there were 13 airlines better, to be an airline of the year in 1983. So just 2 years later, they managed to go from being seen as one of the worst to getting an award for being the best. So it shows that this approach can achieve the goals that it's setting out to. So another example that I have here is David Brailsford. So in 2012, the UK hosted the Olympics in London, and David Brailsford was the team coach for what they call Team GB. And they looked at how they could improve the number of Olympic medals that Team GB could achieve. And it's quite normal for a host country to get a raise in the number of medals that it gets just for the act of hosting the Olympics, which was certainly seen, but it was a bigger leap than is normally seen. And it's a leap that certainly for the next couple of Olympics has been held. Not necessarily to the same level, but has still not gone back to what it was before. And he's got this concept of the aggregation of marginal gains. And it's basically the same thing, just expressed in another way. Lots and lots of small improvements can lead to quite a large overall improvement. And the picture there is a guy called Bradley Wiggins, who won a number of Olympic medals during that period and has won medals, I think, before and after as well, but he's certainly won quite a lot of things within the cycling world. And if you look at the way that he is dressed, you look at his posture, you look at his helmet, there's all sorts of physics concepts which are going on in there, how the air flows through the helmet, over the body, all the resistance. You've got his feet on the pedals, what's the optimum position for this, what's the right way for him to push his legs, etc., in order to gain a little bit of extra power or a little bit less resistance. And the same goes for all of the technical parts of the bike there, how you configure that. You can make small improvements in all of those. And when you're competing at that kind of level, then it's important that you do that, because that can be the difference between winning or being a second behind, which could be enough to knock you completely out the medal slot. So those very, very small differences can help. So one of the things that he did there was this is coming to be quite pertinent in these times, hand washing. He hired surgeons to teach athletes about things like proper hand washing to avoid illnesses during competition. So less people getting ill at the point where they're supposed to compete means that they're better able to go off and win the medal. And not shaking hands during the Olympics for exactly the same reason. And they did other things as well, which used technological things. I know that was one where they put like tire warmers, like you get in the Formula One, around people's legs, so that when they went to do the hurdles, their legs were as warm as possible. And they removed these as short a distance before the start of the race as possible to keep extra elasticity in the muscles, so the leap over the hurdle was done a little bit better. So it's important ideas that we can use in basically in any area of life where we're looking to try to improve the situation that we have. So with that, Tulu, has that given you long enough to set up the polls?
Yes, it's ready now. we can have it. Yeah.
Okay, so if we could go into the first poll, please, that would be great. Okay, so this is just a poll to get an idea, what is the audience that I'm talking to here? Okay, so we seem to have started to peak out in terms of questions answered there. Okay, so let's end that poll. So we've got approximately 40% IT management, 35% asset management, 15% configuration management. So that gives us people who are involved 50% in some type of asset management capability, some description, and around about 50% from other parts of IT, and no one who's not IT on the call. Okay, so that's good, because the rest of my presentation does kind of go to that. Examples with this in mind. So let's move to the second poll. I think it's the right moment for that. So, do you have a CMDB? Okay, very interesting range between high and reasonable coverage on our CMDBs. Okay, so that's settled down now, so we'll end the poll at this point. So we've got approximately 40% with yes and high coverage, 40% with yes and medium coverage, 10% with yes and useless, and 15% with we're planning to improve, and no CMDB at this point in time. So a bit of a mixture between the we've got it and we don't. A remarkably high number of people saying yes, and it has high coverage, accuracy, and utilization. That's very impressive. It's not something that I see quite so high in most situations. Okay, so moving on then to our approach. So here I just thought I'd pull out some principles which are very, very useful in this kind of environment. So the first principle is lean and the set of lean principles. I'm not an expert in lean and won't profess to be. And if you want to know more about lean, you can go into that in a lot more depth simply by Googling for it and picking up what other people have written about it. And resources that are available. But the key idea in lean is about optimizing flow through systems, doing what is necessary and only what is necessary, so you don't get the concept of waste. And waste in lean also means not blocking things. So not having a lack of information or resources to be blocking a process or the ability for some part of the system to do something. So that could be not having the right information being available to people at the right time in order for them to either make a decision or to carry on. Other principle here is one of vision. And this is about laying out what is your vision, understanding what your vision is, having reasons behind the vision and having a good vision, and then articulating that through your organization so that everybody understands what this vision is, where they're going and why they're going there. And another principle around here is evidence-based decisions. So given what we've got in the response to our poll there, I would expect that the capacity for evidence-based decisions is actually quite high amongst the audience here today. So the concept of evidence-based decisions is largely using data to either drive your decisions or to back them up. So this can be doing things like using data to understand where you're having problems or to understand what the scale of problems are. So in asset management, for example, if you do not have all of the information you need from a certain software licensing perspective to understand what your compliance position is, you can use evidence to understand how big a risk you think this is likely to be. And therefore, how important is the fact that you don't understand it and how much prioritization do you need to give it? You may have other issues as well, and you need to be able to understand what's different weightings behind those. So being able to back things up with evidence, and the better you handle data, and the better you process data, and the better you structure your data, it gives you the best ground base to go and do this from. Okay, another point, key point of approach here is iterative. So again, if you look at different ideas we have in the industry, where you take these ideas from, Agile uses this very, very strongly in delivering in bursts of work. Now, these can be, like in the Agile world, 1-2 week type sprint type things, or they can be a slightly larger scale. But trying to deliver everything at once is a very difficult thing to do and generally doesn't work very well. So if you're in the nose, we are planning to improve, and you want to get to yes as high coverage, accuracy, and utilization, trying to do it in one go is pretty much destined for failure. You need to choose certain areas and focus on those first. So that's the key point there, is what do you want to focus on, and can you parallelize? So sometimes you can get different groups of people to be working on different improvements. Sometimes you can't. So if you're competing for resources, then you have to kind of implement things in a serial fashion, one after the other. If you can have multiple groups, then you can start working on more than one thing at the same time. And you want to make sure that the iterations are focused on business needs, and you understand what business needs you're addressing, what you're looking to get out of that at any given point in time. Okay, and the last part of approach here is this idea of continuous service improvement. So everything I've just been talking about in the last slide there, how do you make that into a reality? And this is one of the key things that I've seen when working with organizations. Where there is a desire to improve, is there is often a challenge for getting resources. So we did have a fair number of people who said that they were configuration managers on the call. What we haven't captured is how many people on the call are in organizations that don't have configuration managers. So if you've already got the role, then that's a good starting point, and the same with asset managers. That gives you some resource that you can put towards generating what the improvements should be, putting the prioritization against it. But are they going to actually be able to do the doing of implementing these things themselves, or are they going to have to compete with resources with other parts of the organization? So again, how easy is it to access that? I certainly found in my personal experience being a CSI manager, I needed people to go off and do things like write a script so that printer drivers would be installed automatically. And they had a day job, and they would spend 2 weeks doing their day job, and they'd come back to me and say, oh yeah, it still should only take me about 20 minutes to do the script, but I haven't got the 20 minutes. And then a couple of weeks later, I'd do a follow-up and I'd find exactly the same thing. And there's a big challenge there in terms of trying to get those extra resources from other groups. So part of that is the politics that goes with it, and part of that is the culture that you have with it as well. And this is a key thing with CSIs, is you're really aiming to create a culture of continuous improvement, which is a long-term challenge and is not easily solvable. It's something that requires continuous and ongoing effort in order to achieve. Okay, so what is our ideal state? So you have probably seen versions of this slide in presentations before, the classic holy trinity of people, process, and technology. And as it's so well used, I won't labor it too much, but it is a key point that what we are looking to balance in basically all of the things that we're doing around configuration management, IT asset management, IT service management, is to get this combination. We start generally by looking at processes and seeing that we don't have processes for things, and start looking to try to define what those processes should be. And then we look to see what technology we can use to implement the process. And so we go off and we look at tools. So we look at discovery tools which go and scan for assets, and we have software asset management tools in that space which can go and find out things which will tell us about license positions for Microsoft, Adobe, all of the big players, and give us a better set of data that we can work with there. And then we look at things like our CMDBs in our ITSM tools, and we still haven't got round to talking about the people yet. So this is the big part that often gets forgotten. And I think part of it is that it's easier to understand the other two. Most process documents are a few pages in length. They may go up to 40, 50 pages if they've got lots of tables in and, various different picture fields and stuff like that. And they may, have lots of headings and stuff in as well. And they go to a certain level of depth, but we're still not talking about huge amounts of information. Whereas when we start talking about people, you've got lots of individuals with all their highly complex psychologies going on. And IT people are not renowned for being brilliant with the people side of things. And so we look to technology to provide us with the solutions. But technology is never the solution. It is only ever a part of the solution. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to balance our resources. So here I've just pulled out, there's lots of balances here, but in terms of sort of scales here, I've pulled out a couple. So BAU, that stands for business as usual. So that's what we're doing on our day-to-day type of thing. So, we've got a service desk, we're logging tickets, we've got IT people off making changes, doing those projects. And then we've got what I've described here as building capacity. This is the capacity to build improvements. And this is a key challenge in CSI. So what I have found, certainly when I was CSI manager, was that BAU was what most of the people were working on. And there wasn't a lot of spare capacity to build the improvements. But once we started to build some of the improvements, we started to reduce the amount of time that it took for people doing BAU to do things. And once they've got that time back, they can now use that to do something else. So we end up with a virtuous cycle where the level of capacity over on the right increases because the level of capacity required for BAU decreases. And my next balance here is about focus and breadth. So there is a huge number of topics in IT asset management and configuration management alone. Lots of different areas that we can choose to look at, and how broad do we need to go, and how deep do we need to go on each individual topic. So that's basically our balancing there. If we try to achieve everything at once, we're going to have to put less focus on each individual item. If we try to only achieve 2 or 3 things, we can focus on them a lot more, but at the expense of not doing some of the other areas, maybe not touching them at all. And there's a balance to be struck there. Again, in terms of breadth, you could be making very, very small improvements on some of those areas, which increase your breadth, but could be quite effective. Okay, so I didn't start with this. Feel free for people to ask questions throughout. I can see we've got a couple of things that have gone into the chat, so I'm just going to give that a quick check. Oh, that's where the polls are ready, and that we've got the links out for feedback, etc. Okay, so yeah, do feel free to ask questions as we go through, and I will pause periodically to see if we have any more questions. Okay, so going on to the next slide, we have got a roadmap. Oh, sorry, I can see it's still got a product name in the top there. I do apologize. That's the product that I work with mostly. So where I've used this slide in the past with people who are doing improvement based on that product as their ITSM tool. But that's by the by. Of course, any tool can be used that is appropriate. And so here I've got 2 main areas that I've decided to pull out, and I've deliberately made this relatively simplistic. So we've got asset areas and we've got ITSM areas. So from the question earlier, I was seeing the asset managers fitting kind of more their main responsibilities lying within the blue area, and the configuration managers and the IT management staff sitting more within the orangey yellow area at the bottom. So we're going from a starting point, whatever we happen to have, and we're starting with deciding we need the discovery tool in order to discover data to enable us to do things. So that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to get that in place and get that implemented. And after that, we're then going to look at reporting that we can do on that. And then we're also going to look at what I've called Cloud 1, simply because we're going to do some more on cloud later. This isn't everything to do with our cloud assets. This is just us looking at cloud. This might just be our gathering of requirements and pains and needs and starting to put together the cloud elements to add into this roadmap, or it could be a distinct package of improvements that we're looking to make, maybe in terms of having approvals, maybe in terms of being able to monitor what our costs are, etc. And the other area I put down there is screens. And by this, what I mean is big screens like TVs, wall boards, these kind of things. In meeting rooms where you have a big screen where you can plug in your laptop using an HDMI cable, all of those kind of things. These are all assets, and we want to track them. This is a branch of work to improve the way that we're tracking them. And the reason I'm reading that out is because we have lots of different areas of data within asset management and configuration management. So we've got things like screens, we've got things like servers, we've got end user devices like laptops and mobile phones and tablets. We've got network assets, we've got cloud assets, we've got application assets, and we may have more assets which are under our coverage. So, I mean, I've been talking with one of my customers recently, and they are looking at having, pretty much anything of value going into their CMDB, which is becoming their asset register in their ITSM tool. So they're going to be having things like desks and chairs, cables, and these kind of things going in there as well, because they need to have that for their financial asset management within their company. So although it's not directly IT related, it's going into the IT solution because it is part of the overall asset management. So that's why I'm bringing that in there. It's something in terms of your roadmap to think through, do we implement these one at a time? Do we go for several at once, etc.? And by drawing it out on the roadmap here, I can see that by approximately June time, we should be ready with being able to track screens. So is that important? Does anybody actually really care too much about that? Does the CIO, the CFO, the CEO, have they got some objective which this aligns to or not? Or are there other things which they do have, which is not on here, which should be mentioned at this point, because we should add it into the plan? And maybe we should move screens back to November because it's just not that important for us to be doing right now. And by having this tool on the screen, I can immediately start to generate those types of questions. So this tool is helping me to trigger a discussion and to try to validate the plans that I've been making. And I can use this quite easily with large groups of people and have people feel open to ask questions and to put challenges in. So the same here, just talking through the last bits here, CMDB integration. Okay, we have a discovery tool, so we want to integrate it into our ITSM CMDB. And in this case, we want to get it done before we do our upgrade. Now, this might trigger a question like, well, how are we going to do that? We need the upgrade to have the functionality to get rid of the bugs that we need to get to do the integration properly. So maybe we should swap those two over. Again, we've got a plan to do some enhanced automation. What's that going to rely on? If the automation typically relies on data, so if you haven't got your servers from your discovery tool yet into your CMDB, the automation that you're trying to build to automatically do things on those servers isn't going to be able to function. So we've got dependencies between those, and this is starting to help us to identify what those dependencies are. Other thing I found with this, if you are using it as a communications tool, is to be indistinct in your timing. So in here, you can see I've got months at the top here, which are named months. Sometimes I replace these with just month 1, month 2, month 3. But what you can also see is I have deliberately put them into month blocks. So it doesn't look to someone like they're saying, you will start reporting on exactly the May the 1st, and you will have it finished on exactly May the 30th. You know, that's what you've put into your project plan. We're not at that level of detail in this. We're looking to put broad line plans, which of course will change as we go along, as we find out that some things might take longer than we expected, and there's a dependency, so we have to push the dependency back, etc. But this enables us to start setting expectations and to set out that vision, which I talked about earlier. So it's not absolutely essential that you use these, but they are a useful tool. But the thinking that goes with them is very, very important. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is to talk about the making it stick part. So I'll just do a quick check for messages. No, okay. We'll move on to Kotter's 8 steps. So I don't know if you have heard of Kotter's 8 steps before. It's again something that you can find a lot of information about. It's about organizational change, so it's not directly related to IT or asset management, but it's a set of principles which can be applied to create change within organizations, like the stuff we talked about earlier. So the first few steps here, creating the climate for change. So we're preparing the environment to be able to go ahead and to do the changes that we're thinking of doing. So here, step 1, increase the urgency. If we can always do this later, we can always do it later. So we've got something that needs to be done now, so we get on and we do the getting on with that thing now. Like if, for example, our network was to break when we critically needed it, then we might work on fixing that and dropping other things in order to work on that. As we've seen, that can cause disruption. We might have a Microsoft audit coming up or an Oracle audit coming up. So if we don't do the things that prepare us for that audit, then we're going to go into it not as well prepared as we could have been. So we've got a point there which is helping us to drive to increase urgency. So things like audits of audit findings are useful for this. Again, having high level directives being handed down helps. I've certainly seen this. You know, I've worked with organizations who've had to get change management in by the end of the year, a CMDB in by the end of the year. Last year, I had a customer who needed to have end user devices covered in their CMDB. So we had a tool which would go and do the discovery. We worked out how to integrate that into their CMDB and pull the data in. We pulled in mobile devices and we pulled in laptops and desktops. And we knew who they were connected to in terms of who they were assigned to from that data. And we wrote a policy document, and we wrote a process document, and we had a process flow, and that all went into the tool. And that was their first point in terms of them moving into their CMDB. So other parts were coming later, so that gives us our iterations. But they had that urgent point, is they needed to go to the next year's audit with we've made an improvement based on last year. So now we've got everything in place, and what we're looking to do next year is to improve the accuracy of that data and embed it into the organization. That's where we're moving on to. So finding urgency points, building a guiding team. So getting the right people together who are going to be able to create that vision and who are going to be able to articulate it and who are going to be able to lead the change within the organization. So again, this becomes a political point and generally works better where you've got elements from that guiding team higher in the organization. Grassroots initiatives which don't get or don't end up getting enough backing from a senior level stakeholder tend to fizzle out eventually. So step 3, get the vision right. So you're going in the right direction. You've got a good idea as to what you're doing and why you're doing it. You've got a good idea as to what outcomes you're expecting to get from it and that they are reasonably achievable. And if you can tick all of those boxes, you will find that people will start to get on board a lot better than if you have a vision which is clearly flawed, and people can start poking holes in it right from the get-go. So that's why those things are important early on. It doesn't mean to say you have to understand all of the details of it, just that you've got to get enough right to get it going. Okay, next step, engaging and enabling the whole organization. So this is where we move from our little ivory tower of people who have come up with a great dream as to what it is they want to achieve, and we hit the big block, which is where we tend to get a lot of slowdown. And this is where I found that 4 and 5 people tend to struggle with. Communicating for buy-in is engaged communication. So sending out a communication to say this is our newsletter and this is what we did this month and we've implemented step 1 of our CMDB and we're going to implement step 2 next month is a part of it, but it's not what communication is. There's a lot more to it than that. You need to find a way to actually connect with people on a human level in order to be able to kind of tick off what Kotter is going for with this step. And it's again precisely for that, to try to understand what it is that people are concerned about, what they want, and when they see that being aligned with the vision, then you're going to start getting them to buy in, or you can get the pushback, which enables you to help sort of loop back into the vision. So step 5 is about empowering action. So enabling people where they see the need to change to make the change. So if we go back to the SAS example, that was a big part of what Carlson was saying with his presentation when he launched this, was to say, you are a person who is listening to our customers say they don't want a paper because they're all rubbish. You're the person who's handing them the paper, and then you're with them on the flight, or you've gone off to do whatever else you do in the airport, depending on how they organize it. It's your job to tell us, as the senior executives, that these are the papers that we actually be buying instead, and to make sure it get, and to start getting it going, right? You can do that on a local level. You can tell your boss, they can just say, fine, we'll just start buying different ones because that's what the CEO wants. And you can get your action happening at the right levels within the organization. And creating short-term wins. So again, this is going with the iterative concept. If you start with something which can gain a benefit, gain value from in a very short space of time, people can start to see this is working. And then you introduce another short-term win and they can see it's working. And you follow this up with the empowerment and the communication we've just covered. And it starts to continuously embed that into people's minds. If people wait a long time, sorry, my apologies there. Did I drop off for a second? Am I back on? Can you hear me, Satulu?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had something come on my phone which knocked me out of the Zoom call temporarily, I think.
Yeah,
sorry. So yeah, so the short-term wins and flows into the don't let up and the make it stick, right? It's this iterative concept. We've created some short-term wins. Some of these wins will not be so short-term. Some things obviously require more investment in time and energy and potentially funds as well in order to get from where we are to our next stage of benefit. So like, I mean, just monitoring the screens, right? In order for us to be able to start getting that, we need to have the records in our CMDB able to store it. And then we need to go and capture the data and put it in there. And then we need to have the process for people to be able to update it and to keep it going. And until we've ticked those boxes, we don't really have anything in terms of having managed screens. So we kind of got to tick all of those off as a distinct block. And that can take some time to do. But we can have a short-term win, like we've got a place to put the data. So at least we've got our current data, even if we haven't got an ongoing process that works properly. And the making it stick is really, again, it's a communication piece. It's about embedding it into people's habits and changing the way people work. So that really kind of goes with the CSI concepts of it being about culture. And once people get into the habit of doing things in a certain way, then you find that it flows. You know, new people join an organization, they see the people around them and being taught this is the way we do stuff. They start picking up on it and it starts to stick, even as the people start to change. If it doesn't become culturally normal, then as people change, what happens is you get the cultural degradation. There's people who do something leave, and the other people who are coming in are not picking up the habits or working procedures in the same way. Okay, so how do we make it stick? What are the tools that we can use to help embed that? So the first one here is governance. And given the number of asset managers on the call, I hope we have a reasonable level of that within the audience already. I've marked it here as measure something, because I think that's a good starting principle. And you improve from there. And the act of measuring something, it means that if it's measured and reported in some way, people will look at it and people will then tend to try to tweak the dial. So you need to be careful about what you measure. But if, for example, you started to measure what's the coverage of your CMDB, and you produce a figure for that, and if you've got an IT manager whose job it is to go to his boss and report on that, and it looks bad, and every month he goes there with the same report and it keeps looking bad, probably at some point someone's going to go, why is that looking bad? What can we do to make that better? And it brings some focus on it. And if the answer is, well, we've got a process in place, but nobody's following it, then we are starting to look to have actions which follow up and say, right, well, why is that not happening? What can we do to start making it happening? And then we can start to see that, yes, it is actually happening, and we're tracking that. And this is a big challenge for configuration managers and IT asset managers, is that a vast majority of work with data that needs to be done not by them, it needs to be done by somebody else. And they've got something else as their main job, but they need to do it as a part of other processes, like, for example, in the change management process or service request process, where when you give someone a laptop, you need to assign it to them in this tool. When you go and make a change to a server, you need to log a change as a change request. You need to link the server that's in the CMDB to that change request so we can see that that's happened. If at the end of the month, you don't have any changes logged and no one's checking to see if any were logged and no one's providing feedback to the staff who should be logging them, hey guys, what's going on? You're supposed to be logging these and we haven't seen any go through. You're not going to get that feedback mechanism, which helps drive the behaviors that you're looking for. So that's sort of starting and seeing it from a behavioral perspective. Then you also have things around there in terms of looking at what is your data quality. So just because I've got the latest and greatest discovery tool that went out and got me all the details of my service, is it actually collecting data correctly? What we're seeing compared to what we would expect to see, does that match up? When we talk about the number of cloud assets that we have, does that match what we are being billed for? Because we can be reasonably sure that if we're using AWS or Azure, we are not going to have assets that Amazon have completely forgot that we've got running, giving us lots of lovely CPU cycles, which they are not charging us for. But we may well have things they are charging us for that we had no idea that we had and have stopped using, and there are savings to be made in there. So in terms of the governance, you can go right down into that detailed level. Tracking customer satisfaction. So this is always a good bellwether, and you can use this with stakeholders as well to track stakeholder satisfaction. And you can do point-in-time surveys for this, but you can also just do this as well by talking to people. So there's soft and harder measures that you can use in order to be able to do this. I used to work with a configuration manager who would do a 6-monthly audit on the CMDB accuracy. And one of his measures was he just asked people how accurate they thought it was. And they would come back with figures. So he'd end up with a result like it's 63% accurate because that's what people think on average. And then as he made improvements over time, he could track. So he had a lovely graph on one area where he'd worked. And over 2 years, the perception of the accuracy of CMDB went from 40% up to about 90%. And what that meant was now people are starting to rely on the data. People are starting to use the data. People are deliberately maintaining the data. Part of the reason they believe that it's accurate is because they are the ones that have gone in and made the changes that need to be made, and they know they've done it right, and they know they're doing it all the time. So it was a good measure, even if it was a very, very simplistic measure which didn't have a lot of science behind it. It was certainly something that was useful, and it certainly was able to start a conversation saying, we're starting at 40%, this is rubbish, we need to do something. And being able to get that sense of urgency. So again, it's using this concept of the data-based decision-making, evidence-based decision-making, and creating a sense of urgency that we saw earlier. Feedback, achievements, positive outcomes, and rewarding positive behaviors. People like feedback. People like being patted on the head. People like being told that they've done something that is good and that what they are doing is leading to a greater outcome. One lady who I've worked with in the past had stickers, and she would run around the IT department, and the stickers had configuration management troll, and they had a lady who had decided to take on herself the mantle of being the troll who grumpily says, you need to go and update your assets, you need to go and update your CI records. And she was providing some governance around that, and she would help people out when they had challenges, and she would chase up to say to certain data owners that they needed to do certain things. And when people got all their stuff together, she would go around and she would stick a sticker on their monitor. So when they came in the morning, they would have a config-troll approved sticker. Now, you have to look culturally at your own organization. I'm not suggesting this will work for every single organization. But in her organization, culturally, it worked very, very well. And people really liked having these stickers, and it helps to embed the behaviors. And all it cost her was a couple of pounds on a whole load of stickers, and she had an image for it, and she just printed out them periodically when she needed more. And there was other techniques that those people used to basically the same thing, using posters to communicate ideas and what it was they were doing, with silly memes in them, using themes from things like Star Trek and Star Wars and stuff like that, because their IT department was geeky and those people like that kind of stuff. So they're just finding ways in order to be able to provide both the feedback and their vision in ways which were engaging to people. And then, that leads into us reiterating the vision. So the roadmap that we were looking at earlier isn't going to stay static. It's going to change. Business priorities will change. We'll implement some things, and then we'll realize that maybe the next thing we're looking at isn't quite as important as we thought it was, particularly if you've lived without something for 9 months that you thought you wanted quite quickly, but you were forced to live without it. You might realize that actually you can go another 3 months without it causing any great problems, and you'd rather do something else first. New ideas have come in, etc. So again, taking ideas from sort of agile and iterative working, make sure you update that, and make sure you understand what your challenges and what your successes are, and celebrate what those successes are, so people can see that the change is happening and it is taking effect and it is working, and that helps to get them onto that path that we saw from Kotter. Okay, so bringing the people. How do we bring people? This I find a very useful set of questions to be asking. With any communication that you do and with any process area that you look at, what are the stakeholders? Who are they? Understand them. What is their role? And communicate to them in a way that is relevant. Understand what bits of the process or any changes you're looking to make or any dependencies you have on them, any expectations you have on them. You know, what is relevant for those? Each group separately, and then how do they gain? Particularly if you're asking people to do something, how do I gain? What do I get out of this? So a very good example I had of this a number of years ago. I was working with a company where they had set a vision. They needed change management in towards the end of the year to do the tool implementation part, and their change manager had sat down with someone and watched this guy work for a whole day and recorded 600 changes that this guy had made throughout the course of the day. And they'd agreed that he wasn't going to log everything that he was doing, but he's going to log the important stuff. So they'd set like a bar to say, this is what we want. And her objective was to get more changes logged. So to move the bar of how small the changes or the complexity of the change slowly down. And she needed to make things easier for people. So one of the challenges that I had at that time was that people were going onto servers and doing things like restarting services or rebooting the service as a part of a change. And then the monitoring would go crazy because all of these things had been restarted, so they went offline, and the monitoring people would be seeing all of these red things flashing up in their monitoring tools, and they'd start jumping on this, what appeared to be a P1 incident, rapidly, coming to be, and then finding out someone was just doing a normal schedule change, and there was nothing to worry about at all, and they just forgot to put the monitoring into maintenance mode, so it just suppressed the alarms while they were working on it. And then they had issues where people were turning it on, and then they forgot to turn it off when they finished their change. So then the system would go down a couple of days later, and the executives would be saying, "Hey, you guys said you put monitoring in place." Suddenly the system went offline, and 3 hours later we had to phone you up and say, "Look, guys, why is system X not there?" So that was a big challenge that they had. And what we did was we found a way to automatically put CIs into and out of the maintenance mode when the change hit the start and end times of the change. So data-wise, we needed to have all of those assets in the CMDB in a reliable fashion. We had to have the data feeds all set up for that. We had to have a change process in place. And of course, they had to be searchable. We had to be able to find the assets quite easily. The moment we did this, she had people knocking on the door saying, "We know we agreed only to log these changes, but is it okay if we log these ones as well? Because it's now easier for us to do our jobs by logging a change than it is by not logging a change." So the how do I gain brought these people straight into the process and the improvements that we were looking to make. So again, how does this vision apply to me? Personalize it, and champions. So who is going to champion the cause? So this is again a common topic when you look at organizational change concepts and best practices, is finding people who aren't just so much, should we say, the leaders and the part of the direct team that's driving a change, but who's going to be, shall we say, amongst all of the other people, amongst the troops, who's going to be there, who's going to be standing up for the cause, and doing things, being the first people to log the changes correctly, first people to update the CMDB properly, et cetera, and start talking to their colleagues about it. Identifying keen people and then sort of bringing them into the fold, sometimes formalizing this. I've certainly seen with some organizations where they've had, ITSM tool champions. And they say, right, we're going to go around this. One of our customers has got one champion per area in IT. So the network team have got an ITSM champion, and the server team, we've got an ITSM champion, etc. And they will have meetings from the champions and say, what are the challenges that you're finding? Where can we make improvements? What do you like? What don't you like, etc. So it's got a formalized structure to it, but it doesn't have to have that level of structure to it in order for this concept to be effective. And then the last point, again, governance, and retouching on that point, if you are measuring that people are doing things in the right way or your data is good, etc., it helps to drive the behavior. And you need to use that with the other tools that we've already discussed. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is another version of the same slide, is just to revisit this point here. Everything that I've been talking about here is about balancing out the people, the process, and technology. A lot of what I've talked about is on the people side, but there's an awful lot that we need to consider from all three, and we need to make sure that we're getting the balance right between the three. So going back to here, we can now see how we can use this this roadmap as a tool to both plan, set our vision, but also to communicate and to build engagement with people. I've certainly seen this used in a number of situations where people have had wide town hall discussions and people have felt empowered to speak out and say, what do you mean by ITSM upgrade? What do we need that for? What do you mean by the reporting? Who's it for? Am I going to get my reports in that? Was I included in that? You know, those kind of questions, which helps to make sure you're bringing all the information you need together, and helps to make sure you've got your order of events correct, and that you've got feasibility. Like if you need the ITSM upgrade to do the reporting, this plan clearly isn't going to work. We have to move some things around. Okay, so that brings me to my takeaways. So IT service management is about culture. IT asset management, I find, hangs sort of directly onto that culture, along with other parts of business culture. The key things that we're looking at here are actually much more cultural than they are technological. Setting expectations enables change within an organization. Visualization generates discussion. Iteration helps to embed changes, as well as helping you to deliver according to a lot of the agile principles of, you know, being able to deliver value earlier. And I've thrown this one on as a little bit of a joke, but PowerPoint has some really cool features. I've used a couple of slides in here, which is auto-generated by PowerPoint. The images of the pictures of the cyclist and the airline earlier on were done like that. And I've used a free add-on to create the roadmap. That's literally 5 minutes of work in order to produce that roadmap. So I've done that a lot of times. I've had long discussions with people and they've said, this is what we want to do. And I've just knocked that together and gone, is that what we were talking about? And that has helped to get a good set of challenge questions going on many occasions. Okay, so Tulu, I think that brings us quite nicely on time, if I've got my timing correct. And it brings us to the end of my slides.